Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give it just a few minutes to make sure that everybody can get here. But we're so excited. Thank you for joining us for our first Go Live experience. And we're so happy to be partnered with Myler Bits. Judy is able to join us today. So just a little bit about me. My name is Lenore. I work at Mary's Tack and Feed. Um, I've been lucky to work there for the last 7 years. I started out as part of their sales team as a manager for about 5 years. And about 2 years ago, I moved into marketing, which is so exciting because I get to do fun things like this. And I think it's just great. I love all things about tack, horses, horse care. Super excited to be doing this with Judy today. Judy is with Toclot, and specifically today we're talking about Myler Bits, as you already know. Judy owns 4 Arabian horses that she loves trail riding. She's been with Toclot for about 20 years now, which is amazing, and can't wait to learn more about Myler Bits. So thank you so much. A few little housekeeping things. There is a Myler Bit um, form that I'll share that you guys can download and fill out and email directly back to Myler. If you'd like any assistance picking out a bit or a consultation, have any questions, they make it super easy for you to get a really good specific recommendation for you and your horse. The second thing is that super exciting. We are giving away a free consultation with Dale Myler himself, plus a free Myler bit of your choice on our Facebook page. So if you haven't entered yet, make sure you go to our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Mary's Tack Shop. It's the post pinned to the top of the page. Go ahead, enter right on that post, and you'll be entered for a chance to win a free Myler bit. So it looks like we've got a couple people watching now, which is great. So let's jump right in and learn a
All
little bit
right.
more about Myler Bits from Judy.
Thanks for having me, Lenore. I need to, if you could speak up a little louder. I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you, but
Sure, and I'll try and enunciate.
shout.
Shout. Okay.
Well, thanks
Sounds
for
good.
having me. We're always thrilled to work with Mary's because you guys are an excellent tax store, destination store on the West Coast. And so, yeah, what would you like to know about Myler? Where would you like me to start?
So I think that it would be great to start with maybe just a general um, chat about bidding theory, why we use bits, how they help us
Sure.
communicate. Kind of start with square one and see how
Yeah,
that goes.
absolutely. So bits are, I think all horse people are kind of fascinated by bits, regardless of what camp you're in, English, Western, bitless, bitted. And I think people just love bits. Bits have been around for as long as humans have worked with horses. The very first bit was antler with rawhide for the mouthpiece. It's essentially a full cheek bit from 6,000 years ago. And so it is a tool that's been around to help riders communicate with horses for as long as we've actually domesticated horses. So what makes Myler a little bit different from other bits is it's not so much about the part numbers, the bits themselves. It's really about the thought process on how we go about bidding a horse and what we're trying to do when we bid a horse. So for us, we really believe that bits can only do one of two things. It can either cause resistance, which I think we've all experienced, or it can create relaxation, which sadly a lot of people have never actually experienced when they ride a horse with a bit in its mouth. And so if you think that if you kind of simplify bits down to that essence, it's either going to create resistance or encourage relaxation, then how you go about thinking about the bit and what you're trying to get to do with the bit changes. So we look at the bit as a communication tool. It's a way for the rider to apply pressure in a way that horses can respond to and understand a signal and execute a command. And so all the milers have done is kind of figured out this basic principle how bits work in a horse's mouth and why they do the things they do, why they cause the reactions they cause, and then they've designed bits to kind of work towards improved communication and more sophisticated communication. So at the very essence of Myler is the whole concept of tongue pressure and tongue relief. The tongue is a really important muscle in your body. I mean, it's so important that you don't really think about it until you can't use it. And if you have a cut on your tongue or a blister on your tongue, or you have allergies and your tongue gets swollen, then suddenly you realize how critical your tongue is, not just to speaking, for human beings, but to just your basic motion. So with the tongue is this huge thick muscle in your mouth, and it's actually connected directly to your neck, your shoulders, and your back. So if you interfere with the tongue's ability to move around, then you create tension in all the muscles that it's connected to. So it's kind of like putting a band on your bicep and then lifting weights. So you can do it, but if you do it over time, the pressure on that bicep is going to create muscle atrophy. It's going to cause a reaction down your whole arm. So the tongue is the same way. The tongue is a muscle, and its ability to move around and flex is what keeps your neck, your shoulders, and your back able to move around and flex. So it's even more important to a horse because a horse is a four-legged animal. And so all of his impulsion is coming from the hind end. And when you start at the front and you apply pressure to this muscle in his mouth that affects his neck, his shoulders, and his back, you actually affect the engineering of his whole body, like the motion of his whole body. So the whole concept of tongue pressure, tongue relief comes down to that piece of metal that you put in your horse's mouth. I have my little cheat corner back here. So the mouthpiece that we're most interested in is the single joint. This somewhat ubiquitous. I mean, everybody has ridden in this mouthpiece. So when I'm talking about bits, disregard the cheek piece. So unless I'm specifically talking about cheek pieces, just disregard whatever cheek piece is on the mouthpiece that I'm talking about. My concern and the Myler concern when we're bitting horses is the mouthpiece is for the horse and the cheek piece is for the rider. So the first concern, the primary concern, is the well-being of the horse. And so what we're going to do is focus on the mouthpiece. We don't care about the cheek piece until we get to the point where we need to know what the rider's doing with this horse and what kind of riding are you doing and that sort of thing. So initially, I'm going to talk about the mouthpiece. And the mouthpiece could be on any cheek piece that I just happen to have on this display. So this is called the single joint. And everybody has it. It's 90% of the bits out there, this bit. And so what the Mylers figured out is that when you have this bit in a horse's mouth and you engage the reins from the saddle, your degree of pull is like this. So when you pull back, it actually rotates this mouthpiece down onto the tongue. And what this jointed bit does is it collapses and it applies more pressure to the tongue. So what that is intended to do is apply pressure to a muscle that actually makes it where the horse can't go forward so that the horse learns to give to that pressure. And once the horse learns how to give to that pressure, you shouldn't have to continue applying that pressure. But unfortunately, with this mouthpiece, a lot of people will start a horse in this mouthpiece, and then you can come back 10 years later, and that horse is still going in this mouthpiece. So you've essentially, if you think of it as a kind of analogy of a child, you have a child in kindergarten and you give them a textbook to learn how to read, then you don't leave them with that textbook until high school. Like that is not the only tool they use to learn as they learn more and educate themselves. They're going to exhaust that textbook. Then you're going to give them the next one and the next one and the next one. As they learn more, you have to get more sophisticated teaching tools and learning tools. So this is your baby. This is the apply pressure, teach them to give to the bit. And then once they've learned how to do that, you shouldn't really use the tongue as a pressure point anymore. So the problems arise when people do, when they continue to use this bit past its usefulness, and the horse is trying to comply, but physically can't actually do the thing you're asking him to do because you're interfering with his ability to move his tongue, to move his whole body. So all the Mylers have done is once they with a lot of trial and error, figured this out, they started designing mouthpieces to offer increasing tongue relief. And that's where all the bits on this display, and this is only a representative of some of our most popular mouthpieces, most useful mouthpieces, but that's where all of these bits came from. All these designs came from this concept of finding the balance between the tongue pressure you need to teach the horse and the tongue relief that horse has earned as he's become more educated. So that's kind of the synopsis of Myler. It's really about thinking about bits more in terms of tongue pressure and tongue relief, and really, how can I bit my horse for as much tongue relief as he can mentally handle? And that's ultimately the goal. If you can either create resistance or encourage relaxation, how can I bit my horse so that he relaxes into the bridle, but I can actually still communicate with him and ask him to do things and demand his obedience and have some authority over him. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot more to it, I think, than a lot of people realize.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting that you said the mouthpiece is for the horse and the cheek piece is for the rider. So what are some of the most popular Myler mouthpieces and why?
Sure. So if you keep this one in mind, the single joint, when you look on a Myler display, if you go into Mary's and you see their huge, wall of bits, they have lots of Myler inventory, you will see all these little color-coded tags that are on the mouthpieces. There's level 1, level 2, level 2, 3, and level 3. And what those levels refer to on bits is the degree of tongue pressure or tongue relief that that mouthpiece will apply. So level 1 is maximum tongue pressure. So it's actually the strongest mouthpieces. And this would be a level 1 mouthpiece. You can apply this principle to any bit. It doesn't matter if it's a Myler bit. It doesn't matter what brand it is. You can go home, you can empty out your giant bucket of bits, which we all have, and you can sort them, once I've kind of gone through the levels, you can sort them out into, oh, well, okay, this is a level 1 bit, this is a level 2 bit, this is a level 2, 3, and this is a level 3. I would hazard that majority of you have a lot of level 1 bits. You'll have single joints, you'll have French links, you'll have Dr. Bristol's, you'll have lozenge bits. There's just any broken bit that collapses in the middle is going to be a level 1 mouthpiece. This is, and again, don't look at the cheek piece, this is a Myler level 1 mouthpiece. So this is the O2 mouthpiece. So within the levels, all the different styles of bits actually have a number code so we can tell them apart. So the level 2 mouthpiece is actually the Myler answer to the single joint. When I pick it up in the center, can you do this? It will still collapse, but it'll collapse into a U instead of a V. So what that means is it's actually going to wrap the bars of the mouth instead of clamping down on the bars of the mouth. So when you apply the reins on this mouthpiece, the single joint, you get two things happen. One is the tongue pressure I've already referred to, but the other is this clamping pressure on the bar and lip of the horse's mouth. It's an unintentional pressure, but it happens. There's no way around it when you pull back on the reins with this. So this mouthpiece is curved, and it will allow the bit to sit more comfortably in the horse's mouth. It will still apply just as much tongue pressure as a single joint. Mechanically, it's a level 1 mouthpiece. It's maximum tongue pressure. It will be a little more comfortable. The pressure will be distributed across this barrel instead of the single joint. Did you lose me? Nope.
Oh, thank you so much, Norman. So much better. I put it on mute because I have 4 dogs. And you never know what's going to happen when you're working from home. I'm sure everybody has had this at some point.
That's hilarious.
I try to put myself on mute, and of course, I forget to take myself off.
Yeah, don't do that again.
I won't.
We would enjoy the barking of the dogs. It will make us feel as though we're home.
Yeah, exactly. And people are due home any minute, so it's going to get really fantastic. But I was just taking a minute to remind you guys, if you have not joined our or entered for a chance to win a free Myler bit and a free consultation with Dale Myler himself, please take an opportunity to do so. It's pinned to the top of our Facebook page. It's a pretty simple way to enter and a great opportunity to get some one-on-one bitting advice with the bit mister himself. He's a pretty amazing guy, and anybody would be lucky to have a chance to speak with him about bits and bidding. So now that we're all back, let's continue mouthpieces.
So yeah, I was just talking about this level 1 mouthpiece. And this is the Myler version. So when you look at level 2, for comparison, just to get a slightly different cheek piece. So level 2 mouthpiece, now this is the 04 mouthpiece. It's going to collapse when I pick it up. It's still going to apply tongue pressure. But when you look at it at the front, and it's probably a little hard to see, if I can get this angled properly, maybe in front of my shirt, black shirt. You can see that there's a tiny little port on the front of this bit. So it has about a 1/4 inch port versus the level 1 bit, which does not have any port at all. So the action of the port allows the tongue a place to pass under the bit. So that basically uses tongue pressure as the primary pressure point for level 2, but it's starting to introduce the concept of tongue relief. A place for the horse's tongue to pass under the bit so he can swallow comfortably. And then you move up to level 2-3. So you would have a more solid mouthpiece like this, or in English, it would look like this. Same mouthpiece, different cheek pieces. And they may or may not collapse. There's a wide variety of mouthpieces in level 2-3 because they're trying to find a way to offer horses tongue relief, but still maybe use some tongue pressure because the horse is more advanced in training. And then when you get up to level 3, this is actually a dressage legal level 3 mouthpiece. They offer maximum tongue relief with almost no tongue pressure. So this is an English version, and then in Western, it would be this little guy. This is one of our most popular mouthpieces. So the mouthpieces that I just showed you are some of the most popular because they actually walk you through the Myler logic pretty methodically. So the level 2 mouthpiece, the 04, is a really nice starting bit. The 36, which was that level 2-3 mouthpiece I showed, that's a really nice management bit for horses that know what they're doing, don't need a lot of overhandling, but still need some guidance. And then when you get to level 3, you're talking about a finished horse. So a finished horse for a performance horse is going to be a horse that knows his job, shows consistently, executes maneuvers reliably. It's going to be your Grand Prix dressage horses, your finished reiners and cutters. In a trail horse, a finished horse is going to be the horse that can go out by himself, can deal with obstacles safely and reliably, can leave a group of horses without a fuss or a muss, and the rider never feels like there's any moment where they feel unsafe on the trail. So finished horse, the more finished the horse is, the more honest the horse is, the higher the level of mouthpiece they should be in, because that mouthpiece is going to afford them more tongue relief. And again, in another analogy, it's kind of like having a teenager trying to figure out what bit for your horse is that point when you have a teenager where you can say, here are the car keys, I trust you to go down to the store on your own, get the groceries, and bring them back without having a disaster. And that's kind of what happens with your horse. As he gets educated, he earns your trust, he earns your sense of responsibility, and you reward him by giving him more and more freedom in the form of giving him more and more tongue relief. So it's a process to figure out where your horse fits on that spectrum.
I think it's so wonderfully helpful, especially when we're helping customers in the shop, to have it broken down so strategically, and you can really hone in on some great bit choices right from the get-go with the Myler system. So since we've spoken about mouthpieces a little bit, let's talk about cheek pieces, if you don't mind. I'd love to know, there's so many great Myler cheek pieces, what they're all used for.
So, there's English and Western, and the difference between English and Western, in English, which if you do it all the time, you sometimes just don't think about it. But in English, we ride with direct rein action, direct contact with the horse at all times. So there's always tension in the reins. So the cheek pieces tend to be ring bits. So the loose ring, the egg butt, or a D ring like this, are fairly standard. We call them snaffle cheeks, and a snaffle cheek is direct rein action. So when you pull back on a ring bit like this, every degree of pull you apply, every degree of pressure is the same amount of pressure on the horse's face. In Western, because we ride with a loose rein, and you ask the horse when you want to change direction or change movement, the cheek pieces are a little bit different. So that's where you get into more of the shank cheeks. So they will start a horse in a direct rein action snaffle bit, but they will eventually graduate to a shank bit, and that's primarily because Western horses are still heavily used for working. And when you're working on on horseback, whether you're wielding a rope or 500 years ago you're wielding a sword, doing anything one-handed is really difficult with a snaffle because it really puts the rider in a one-to-one relationship with the horse as far as asking him to do something and executing the command and keeping your authority over the horse. So if you're wielding a tool like a rope or a sword, then a shank bit is going to allow you to do more with less. So the way shank bits work is they work on the principle of leverage. So English and Western both have leverage bits. This is a standard Western leverage bit. It's a 7-inch shank. We also have a 5-inch shank, and we have a couple that are kind of in between. And then in English, a leverage cheek would be like a kimberwick. So this is a kimberwick. It has a little purchase on the top, and it has a position for a curb, or a snaffle rein and a curb rein. So it acts like a lever arm. So it's essentially the English version of a shank bit. And a palum is very similar in principle as well. It's also an English version of a shank bit. So the way that a shank works on leverage is that this shank is the lever arm that you're rotating. So when you buckle the bridle on the top, you fix the bit in the bridle so it can't move around. And when you buckle the rein at the rein position, now you've created this leverage arm. So when you engage the rein, you lift the lever, and the pivot point of the lever becomes the mouthpiece. So the fulcrum, so to speak, is the mouthpiece in the horse's mouth. So when you rotate the lever, you are engaging the pole, the top of the head, the pressure of the bridle behind the ears. You are also engaging the curb strap, which is usually buckled behind the chin, under the chin. So you're lifting the curb, so it's applying chin pressure. And then eventually, you're going to rotate this mouthpiece. So what the leverage does is it activates several pressure points before the mouthpiece. And that's called indirect rein action. So instead of pulling one-to-one, now your rein pressure is being magnified by this lever. And it's the easiest way to think of it is if you have a 500-pound boulder and you try to lift it, you can't lift it directly unless you're Arnold Schwarzenegger. But the average person cannot lift that boulder on his own. But if you get a crowbar and you kind of ram the crowbar under the boulder to a certain pivot point, then suddenly that crowbar becomes a lever arm, and it will magnify your force on that boulder so that you can actually roll it or move it if you have to. And that's what happens with this lever arm on the bit. It actually allows the rider to use less rein pressure and activate multiple pressure points, and it does magnify the force on the horse's mouth. That's why leverage is used in Western, is used a little bit more than in English, because in English, if you ride with a lot of contact, it would be constant pressure magnified on your horse's mouth. So the English shank bits, the palum and the kimberwick, are much smaller than a Western shank. If you're doing roping, if you are working hard on your horse, typically the longer shank will allow you to do less with your hands and get the same action. So when you ride with leverage, it just allows you to do more with less, and that's where you have to ride a little lighter. Now, the leverage in and of itself is not bad. Measuring leverage so that you understand what's happening when you engage your horse's mouth is just a simple mathematical exercise. So if you look at this cheek, it's 7 inches long. So this is 5 inches below the mouthpiece in ratio to 2 inches above the mouthpiece. So it's like a 2.1 to 1 ratio of shank to purchase. In order to have an effective lever, you always have to have more below the mouthpiece than above the mouthpiece. And a 2 to 1 is not bad. Some Western bits, they'll have the mouthpiece up here, and you have like a 7-to-1. Well, that's a super powerful lever arm. That's a lot of leverage. With Myler, we make sure that we moderate the leverage by moving the mouthpiece down the cheek piece so that you never have a really, really strong leverage bit. But it all comes down to then what the mouthpiece is. So if you have a lever arm and you have a broken mouthpiece, you essentially have what we call Tom Thumb. And Tom Thumb bits were created as basically level 1 mouthpieces with leverage. And so it turns it into a really, really, really strong bit. If you wanted a softer version, then you would be better off looking at a leverage bit like this. This bit doesn't break. This is our 33 mouthpiece. And all that's going to happen when you engage this lever arm is you're going to rotate this bit across the bar and the lip, but you are not going to be able to affect the tongue at all. The tongue is going to be able to swallow completely under this bit. So between these two, the softer of the two, in terms of how it acts on the horse's face, is going to be the level 3 mouthpiece. The same lever action, essentially, but the mouthpiece is going to make the difference in how strong or how severe the bit is. And so the more leverage you use, generally the better off you are to use a more corded bit, because it'll be softer on your horse and it gives them more tongue relief. Does that make sense?
That sounds great. Yeah.
And then one additional thing that Mylers have done, which you actually, Lenore, asked me about before, is they've modified the ring bit. So we have a unique cheek piece. We call them the cheeks with hooks. And what we've done is taken a basic ring like this, like a D, and where on a basic ring, you put it in the horse's mouth, and let's get it right side up, and the bit can slide around in the bridle. And when you pull back on the rein, it slides to the point of least resistance, and all you can really do is pull or not pull, pull or not pull. You can't really lift the cheek. You can't use the independent side movement that almost all of the bits have, which is allowing you to move each side of the bit independently. That's what this barrel is for. But you can't really use it effectively when you use a regular direct rein action cheek piece. So what they've done is they've modified the ring bit, and they've put a slot at the top so you can buckle it to the bridle, similar to the way you use a shank bit. And then a ring at the bottom, and you can buckle the reins to this. So your rein will slide, but it's going to stop here, and then you're going to be able to lift the cheek piece. So what the modified snaffle does is essentially give you the indirect rein action of a shank bit, but you don't have the leverage. So if you're uncomfortable with the concept of a leverage shank cheek, but you like the concept of distributing your rein pressure over the pole, the chin, the bar, the lip, and then the tongue, then this would be the kind of cheek piece that would work really well for you, because you can do all of that, but you're not going to be increasing the force on your horse's mouth the way you would with a leverage bit. This is not a leverage bit because the ratio is 1-to-1 of where you attach the rein below the mouthpiece to where you attach the bit to the bridle above the mouthpiece. So there's no actual leverage possible with a cheek with hooks. It just allows you to use a more sophisticated set of pressure points that are not focused 100% on the tongue. And then we've added loops so that you can actually put a curb strap on here, and that will make the bit a lot softer. So what a curb strap, or you can use a curb chain if you want, but what its purpose in life is to keep the cheek piece from over-rotating. So when you put a curb strap on and you engage the rein, it stops the bit from over-rotating onto the tongue. So that will help engage the pole. It pre-signals the mouthpiece, so the horse feels that pressure, and he knows, oh, I should give to that. And if he gives to it, the mouthpiece will never fully engage. But it also keeps the bit from over-rotating. And so the curb strap or the curb chain is there to protect the horse. So that's why it's really important that you know if you should or shouldn't use a curb strap or chain with the mouthpiece that you have. Make sense?
Yeah. And then, so the D ring snaffle cheek that has the slots on it, that works the same way. Just any of those.
It does. It's just a different aesthetic. So there's the egg butt, which has the rounded corners. There is the Western offset D, which is just a look that Western riders prefer with a little decorative stack. And then there is the English D. And mechanically, they're all identical. They all do exactly the same thing. It's just going to be the aesthetic that you prefer. So I have Arabs. I like the egg butt because it's got that rounded look. It's a little smaller than the English D. It looks a little nicer on a finer headed horse. Um, really love the look of the Western D. It's super cute.
Yeah.
And if you have slobber straps, we've made this big enough that it will accommodate slobber straps and Western
Oh,
ring.
that's what
That's why
it
it's a little bit
is.
different styling. So,
Okay.
so yeah, it's just a different aesthetic.
Gotcha. That's great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So let's see what else. Could you talk a little bit maybe about the difference that the rider can experience between a loose ring and an egg butt cheek piece? We
Oh,
get that asked a
sure.
lot in the shop.
We love to talk about the loose ring. At least I do. So, the loose ring is one of those problem children. So, it's a super, kind of like the single jointed mouthpiece, it's a super popular cheek piece. So, to the horse, it's actually pretty inoffensive because he can move the bit up off of his tongue. So, regardless of what mouthpiece you have in it, he can move it around. He can get his tongue under it and swallow. And so, at the end of the day, it's not for him. It's not a horrible thing. For the rider, it can feel to me, for example, because I don't ride in this. When I do have to ride in a loose ring, I feel like I'm using something like it's like a blunt object. Like I'm trying to do surgery with a baseball bat. That it feels stultifying and kind of muffles everything. And that's because I'm not used to everything being in motion all the time. So the mouthpiece slides around the ring, the bit can slide around in the bridle, and the rein can slide around on the cheek piece. And as a rider, if you're trying to teach a young horse, a lot of people will use a loose ring because it's pretty inoffensive. The horse feels like he can move it around, and a lot of times that helps him to kind of, you know, take the edge off anxiety or stress of learning a new thing because he can move this around. The downside is that because everything moves all the time, if you're a young horse trying to figure out what your rider is asking you, it can be super confusing. So the amount of time you spend on trial and error with a cheek piece like this really is counterproductive to any of the benefits that it would have in terms of the horse being able to lift the mouthpiece up off of its cheek. So as a teaching tool for a young horse, I think it's super confusing. For a finished horse, like a really lovely Grand Prix horse, a dressage horse, who's riding off of seat and leg cues, and the bit is almost incidental. It's almost just a requirement that they have to have it, and he's not really using it as his primary aid. The loose ring is fine because he doesn't need the bit for guidance. He's using the rider's other leg and seat aids for that guidance. But for a young horse trying to puzzle it out, it's incredibly messy. It's just really sloppy. And it also can make, it's the one mouth or one cheek piece that can make a horse have a really busy mouth because they can play with it. So they will play with it because if they can play with it, they play with it. So in that regard, I'm not a big fan of the loose ring. I don't find it to be a super useful tool. I would prefer to control the mouthpiece and know what's happening when I touch my reins and ask my horse to do something. I like to know the precision. I like to know the exactness. I like to have control over it so that I'm not inadvertently confusing him. And I just find that for the most part, you can't do that with this cheek piece. The fixed cheeks, like the egg butt and the D, they're a little bit better because at least you've eliminated, the mouthpiece sliding around in the ring. But they're still kind of, for me, they're still kind of sloppy. And the fact that you can't use the independent side movement when you use a regular ring for me personally, with my horse, is a total deal breaker because when you can use this independent side movement and lift one shoulder, you get a much more fine-tuned signal. And so for me, the cheek with hooks, or I actually use the combination bit a lot, it is a much finer tuned method of communicating with my horse than a ring bit is, where all I can do is pull or not pull. So for me, it kind of is at the low end, the loose ring, then the egg butt and the D. The modified cheeks are fantastic. And then if you are comfortable riding with a shank, then the shank cheeks or the modified snaffles both work really well in terms of precision of communication. It just depends on what kind of riding you're doing, what you need your hands to do. So.
Gotcha. So I have two things real quick.
Yeah.
Carmen, I'm going to ask you to DM us separately, and we'll talk about your horse and some stuff that you've had going on with your bits. So if you wouldn't mind just messaging us directly, we'll be happy to talk about what might be suitable for your horse. And also, one of my friends from college just signed on blindly, so hi. um, so since you mentioned the combination bit, would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Sure. So this is an example of combination bit. It's not on a bridle. I have one on a bridle or headstall that I'll show you. So you may have seen it if you've been looking at Myler Bits for a while or have been in a store and seen them. You've probably seen this contraption. It has a nose band, it has a chin strap, and it has this long cheek with 3 rings and whatever mouthpiece. We have several different mouthpieces that we offer it in. So there's a lot of bits that are called combination bits that are floating around out in the marketplace. And what most combination bits do, they have a rawhide noseband, they have a chain, and they usually have a single joint mouthpiece and then some kind of cheek piece. It might look something like this. And what happens when you pull back on the reins is everything clamps down at one time. The nose, the chin, and the mouthpiece all kind of go whack at the same time when you engage the reins. That's a lot of pressure suddenly. So what the combination bit does is it actually synchronizes your rein pressure. So the unique thing about the combination bit, let me show you one that's on a headstall, is the way that the cheek piece is designed. That's the patented part of the bit. So on a headstall like this, if you can see, and I will zip in here, it doesn't get too weird, but you can see how the noseband and the chin strap connect through this purchase at an angle. So what happens when you put it on your horse, this is not a curb strap. We call it a chin strap because it sits up higher than a curb strap, and a curb strap needs to have a little bit of looseness to it so that you could rotate the shank cheek before you engage the curb. The combination bit, the way that it works is that when you rotate the cheek piece, you want the chin strap and the noseband to engage first. So you put it on with tension here. You would snug up the chin strap so that it's flat against the jaw, and you can just get a pinky under the noseband. It shouldn't hold the horse's mouth shut. So when I trail ride in a combination bit, my horses can eat too much, drink, and they're quite comfortable. But when I engage the reins, there's tension here, and what happens is the noseband and the chin strap will engage first. And because this cheek rotates, engaging the nose and the chin, it also engages the pull pressure. So your rein pressure when you engage the bit first engages the nose, the chin, and the pull, which are halter pressure points that your horse has learned since he was a baby. He put his first halter on, and he's learned to give to nose, chin, and pull pressure. So if he gives to that pressure, if he understands what's happening, and he gives to it, and you release him, then he gets the idea. Oh, I feel the nose, chin, and pull pressure. I give to it, they release me. But if he ignores it, then the mouthpiece will start to move. And it has about a 1-inch slide before it hits the stop. So when it slides, if he's still not listening to you, that slide is basically a warning. It's a kind of wake-up call. Hey, if you don't pay attention to me, then something else is going to happen. And if he listens to you, comes back to you, then everything relaxes. But if he doesn't listen to you, and he continues to push into the bridle, then it's going to hit a stop. And when it hits that stop, then the mouthpiece will engage. In this particular case, this is our most popular. It's the 04 mouthpiece. It's a level 2 mouthpiece. So it will apply tongue pressure, and it has a little bit of tongue relief in it. And so the horse basically, with a combination bit, gets 3 opportunities to listen to you before the bit fully engages and he feels any tongue pressure. So what it's really great for, and what I primarily used it for, is because I start my own horses, is starting horses. Because when you bit up a horse for the first time, the minute you touch the reins, you're using the bit. So the minute you touch the reins, you're causing a reaction, whether it's positive or negative. So with a combination bit, when you touch the reins, the first thing you engage is the nose, the chin, and the pull pressure. And the mouth pressure only comes into play if the horse isn't responsive and isn't in sync with you. So it keeps the horse really soft and light. If you've had a horse, a Western horse in bocile training, then he's going to transition to this really well. If you have an English horse, if you're schooling for dressage, for example, this works really well because you can frame a horse up, but never really have to apply a lot of tongue pressure that really might interfere with that horse's ability to move forward. But it's also a really handy tool for cross training different disciplines. It works great for cross country, jumping, endurance, barrel racing, wherever you have speed and maneuverability have to go hand in hand, because you can ride off of the halter pressure points, but the horse is carrying the bit in case you need it. So in that regard, it's got more finesse than a hack rope, for example. So it's a really lovely tool. It looks super intimidating, but it's actually the softest thing you can put on your horse's head. I mean, it really is. It disperses the rein pressure. We would recommend it frequently for horses that are in therapy programs with riders who don't have good upper body balance, and they tend to haul on the reins, and they tend to use the reins for balance and to keep keep themselves upright. Schooling ponies, horses that tend to get sour. Combination bit will kind of buffer them between the novice rider and the well schooled master. And so it's a really nice training tool for that. And then it's just an excellent teaching tool for any horse because it really does a nice job of being precise, but also dispersing that rein pressure.
Yeah, it's a great bit. We have lots and lots of trainers that really use the combinations bit, and it is so unique, and it's something that Myler is
You're riding lots of different horses. It's a great tool to have in your toolbox because you can use it on lots of different horses. One question we do get a lot is with this cheek piece, sometimes people are a little intimidated because they think it's so long that it's a leverage cheek. But if you go back to the description I had before, when you measure leverage, to have leverage, you have to have more shank below the mouthpiece than above the mouthpiece, that like this shank. So when you look at a combination bit, if I can show it here clearly, the shank is actually smaller below the mouthpiece than the purchase is above the mouthpiece. So it's kind of like having a bit like this. And you literally cannot apply pressure with this kind of inverted relationship. So even though it's a really long cheek, it doesn't have any leverage, or if it has any leverage at all, it's going to be a very, very, very small amount. We don't recommend using the big ring. That's the other question we get. The big ring is there simply to give the bit a place to slide. The rein positions would be either the lower or the middle rein position. And because it's not a leverage cheek, it's not going to make it a stronger or harsher depending on where you put the rein position. So picking a rein position on a cheek like this is really about your hands. So if you have a very slow, soft hand or very tentative hand, you're going to do much better in the lower rein position because it's going to translate your rein action more efficiently. If you tend to be really quick and heavy, or you're going to ride the combination bit with a lot of contact and really ride the horse into the bridle, because I tend to be a two-handed rider because the little bit of tutelage I've had has been in English, then the middle position is probably going to give you the contact you want. But at the end of the day, you can actually experiment and see which one feels better to you when you actually ride your horse. And it could be completely different from what I just said. It's really going to be about how you feel your rein action is being efficiently translated to your horse. And so you kind of just, and if you're riding different horses, you might find that you use one for one horse and one for the other. If you're riding the same horse in two different sports, you might find that you do the lower rein for your cross country and you do the middle rein for your jumping, your stadium jumping if you're a 3-day eventer. So it really just requires some experimentation and attention on the part of the rider to figure out what's going to work best for you and your horse.
That's great. So I've got two more questions, and I think we can loop them together because, believe it or not, we're already 45 minutes. So
I'm not surprised.
So my questions are: how would you even go about picking a bit for your horse? Okay. And once you've made that selection, how would you go to transitioning your horse into his new bit?
Both very excellent questions. So as far as how you bit your horse, people tend to be really intimidated by the whole concept of bitting. And because there's just a ton of bits out there and you just kind of keep trying and trying and trying. So our approach is a little bit more methodical. If you go back to the whole concept of creates resistance, encourages relaxation, what we would say is, first of all, knowing when you need to change your bit. And that is probably one of the biggest issues. So, I know you can't really see it very well, Across the top here, we have what we call, and they're illustrations of the signs of resistance. If your horse is demonstrating any of these signs, so going above the bit, whenever you touch the reins, the nose goes up in the air. Going behind the bit, so you touch the reins and he tucks his chin, and you just have to throw the reins away to get him back onto the bit. Opening his mouth, sticking his tongue out of his mouth, flipping his tongue over the bit, chewing excessively, and leaning on the bit, or where you feel like he suddenly got very heavy. I mean, I've ridden a dressage horse where I felt like I was carrying two 50-pound bags, one in each arm. And I was like, I just don't know how people can ride a horse like that. So really heavy or leaning or rooting where they dive down periodically, throw you off balance, and then come back. Those are all signs that the bit that you're using is applying too much tongue pressure for what that horse is trying to do. And some horses are super stoic. Schoolmaster, he just has that snaffle and he just does the thing. He might throw his nose up in the air, but he's still doing all the things that the student's asking him to do because he knows that that's what he has to do. Some horses, I mean, I ride Arabians, not stoic at all. So you are never, ever mystified by what your horse is thinking when you ride an Arab. If they're not happy, nobody's happy. Super dramatic about the whole thing. A lot of flinging themselves around and, oh my gosh, I don't know what's happening to me. And so you watch for those signs, and that's when you kind of realize, oh, it's connected to my rein pressure. So that's not just bad behavior. That's me actually physically impeding my horse's ability to function, and now he's trying to find a way around that. So recognizing first, should you change the bit? Changing the bit just because you listen to somebody like me talking about it, and now you feel terrible because you've been using a single joint for 15 years on the same horse. If that horse is going forward with his ears forward, his eye is soft, his tail is quiet, he's on the vertical, you're riding him into the bridle, and he is framed up and relaxed, then there's literally, it doesn't matter if it's a single joint, there's literally no reason to change the bit. But if your horse is not, if you get the seesaw action, where he's like that, halfway around the arena, and then the other half, he's like flinging himself up out of the bit, where he goes really nicely for 3 or 4 strides, and suddenly he's opening his mouth. And then he's fine again, and then he's opening his mouth. Those are all signals that that horse is trying to cope with the tongue pressure and get around it so they can keep doing the thing you're asking him to do. Some horses don't handle it very well. They can escalate, they start to lean, they start to push through, they start to run through, and they can rear, they can buck, they can get frantic, they can just escalate. Most horses are super honest and trying to do their best, and so they just deal. But you look for those signs, and that's how you know that it's time to change the bit. So the process you would go through is, what is the mouthpiece I'm currently using? And if you're looking at Myler, what level does that mouthpiece fit into? So if you pick it up in the middle and it breaks, it's going to be a level 1 mouthpiece for the most part. And it's probably not going to have, unless it's a Myler, it's not going to have any port to it. So that tells you that there's no tongue relief. So all right, well, maybe I need to ride him with more tongue relief. So then the second question is going to be, how much tongue relief can I give this horse safely? So the way we kind of evaluate it, 2 questions. One is, on a spectrum, where at one end you have a super flighty and anxious horse who really needs, is insecure, really needs the rider to tell it what to do all the time. And at the other end, you have the very bold, dominant horse. You don't make the decision, he's going to make it for you really quickly. In the middle, you have the steady Eddie. He's super trustworthy. He listens. He's obedient. It doesn't matter how old he is. He's just willing to do the job as long as he understands what you're asking. Where your horse falls on that spectrum is going to tell you how much tongue relief that horse really deserves. The better minded, the more honest, the more stable, and more consistent your horse is in his behavior, then the more tongue relief he really deserves. You can say the more educated, so the more technical he is, like Grand Prix dressage horse, you could make an argument for more tongue relief, but honestly, it's really the horse's personality that determines the degree of tongue relief. Because you can have a Grand Prix dressage horse that's a total basket case. And you can have a 4-year-old quarter horse that's as steady as the day is long and never misses a beat. He doesn't know anything, but he's just trying his all, and he's got, he's really solid. So you just have to figure out where your horse falls on that spectrum, and then try to bit your horse for as much tongue relief as he can mentally handle. The other question that helps us kind of evaluate where the horse is at mentally is his spook. So horses are flight animals. And they're designed to be able to run away if something startles them. They have a very, very heightened flight instinct, as every horse owner knows. So if you look at your horse's spook and the kind of spook that he has when something unusual pops up, then that is going to tell you how much self-control your horse has. So if he's got a spook in place or barely spooks at all, that's a horse with really, really, really good self-control. If he's a spook, blow up, and head for the hills, that is a horse with really poor self-control. So the horse, if he's great 98% of the time and he's awful 2% of the time, or he's unpredictable 2% of the time, then bit for the 2%, because he can always grow into it. If you bit too soft too fast, then you might end up in a situation where you don't have enough authority over the horse to keep him safe, to keep you safe, and that you don't have enough control. Now, I would say the issue of control, one of the questions we get is, do you have a bit that will stop my horse? And control for a horse owner is an illusion. Physical control of your horse using a bit is a total illusion, because that horse weighs 1,000 pounds. And you could be a good sized guy, weigh 250, 300, or an average woman, 100, 150, 160, against 1,000-pound animal in motion is anything you can do is an illusion. If you have a horse that spooks, grab the reins, and that horse comes back to you, he came back to you because he asked. He didn't come back to you because the bit made him. So he's quite capable of blowing through it and doing whatever he wants. So that is something that's really important to understand, because control is communication. Control is not imposing your will on your horse with a bit. So, and in Myler, you're not going to get a bit from us that imposes your will on your horse. It's going to ask him to do it in a way that he understands and can respond properly. And so that's kind of what our ultimate goal is. So first figuring out how much tongue relief you can get, and then looking at the level that will help you kind of determine what mouthpieces you should focus on. And then it's a lot of fine tuning. And one great thing about Mary's is they will let you try a bit. You can test a bit and see how it works, and then you can swap it out if it doesn't work. They have an excellent program. When you transition, so the second part of your question, Lenore, is how do you change out a bit? If you're going to transition from one bit to another, I think every horse owner is guilty of just going out, bridling up, putting the bit on the bridle, throwing it on the horse, and getting on. And then an hour later, you get off, and you're like, oh, he hated that bit. Just spend all this time doing whatever. Well, changing the bit, especially if you go from a broken bit like a single joint to a curved bit, or a combination bit, which is a whole different language, is literally like me standing here speaking English to you and then switching to Russian midstream. And most of the audience, I'm guessing, would be at a loss and not have any idea what I'm asking, and so or saying. And so it's the same thing for your horse. So give that horse the benefit of figuring it out. So bridle him up, and then we recommend a transition exercise in an arena or a round pen or a corral or somewhere enclosed, where you stand next to your horse, lift the rein, you ask him to give, you watch him give, and as soon as he gives to the pressure, you release. And you really exaggerate the release. And you ask for the vertical flex. You can do lateral, side to side, but I would do that very minimally because most people have already overtrained on that. So ask for the vertical and then release. And do it on both sides. And you'll see him like just thinking through, oh, the pressure's different. Oh, this is weird. He might go back a little. He might fling his head around a little, but he's thinking through and kind of testing it and trying to figure it out. And then let him relax for a few minutes, do it again. And once he seems to be giving comfortably, then you can get in the saddle and start asking the same. Give him a few minutes and then start asking him to move around and do whatever you're going to do with him. And then I would say on average, most horses need 6 or 7 of their normal riding sessions to figure out if it's going to work for them. And so give it some time. Give it some time for him to figure out what the difference is, and then determine if it's actually doing what you want it to do. Is it communicating effectively? Is he responding appropriately? Are you seeing an improvement in any of the resistance that you'd seen before? He might still put his nose in the air once in a while, but it's less frequent and it's starting to diminish, or he's not opening his mouth as much. All of that takes time to go away. And so, you spend however long building up all those resistance behaviors, and it's not magic. It's not just going to stop happening. You might even see it I call it regression, where you've changed out the bit, you've had good results, you've been riding in it for a while, You start to teach your horse something new, and suddenly that behavior comes back. But it's not really tied to your rein pressure, and you're like, I don't, why is he suddenly doing this thing again? And a lot of times it's like me twirling my hair if I'm nervous. It's their go-to move when things are different and they're stressed and they're trying to figure it out, and they just repeat that behavior. And then once they figure it out, the stress goes away and the behavior goes away. So you have to be really discriminatory as far as like determining if it's the bit, actually the mechanical action of the bit, or if it's a behavior coping mechanism. And if you think it's mechanical action of the bit, then you might need to fine tune the bit selection a little bit. But that just kind of gives you a more methodical approach, and it gives him a chance to figure it out.
Yeah, I think definitely guilty of saying, "Oh, this bit'll work," and
I mean, I've done it too. I still
off I go. So yeah, that's great advice. We are going to wrap up. Thank you so much. I just want to
Absolutely.
remind everyone first, thank you so much to Myler Bits and Judy. They are phenomenal brick and mortar supporters of our local tack shops. And they are sponsoring this great giveaway for our Facebook page right now, where you can win a free consultation with Dale Myler and a free Myler bit of your choice. So if you haven't entered yet, please enter on our Facebook page. It's pinned to the top page. The second thing is I just want to touch on our bit rental program, like Judy mentioned. If you are considering trying some bits, you want to know for surezies that your horse likes a bit before you commit to it, check us out, give us a call, shoot us a text, DM us, anything, and we'll explain how that works to you. It's a pretty great thing to be able to ride in 5 or 6 bits before committing to one. And I think the third thing is that we do have a special just for people who've tuned in today. If you message us, I'll get you the form for Myler. You'll fill it out a little bit about you and your horse. They'll send it right to Myler, and they'll get back to you with their thoughts, suggestions, and some great bits that you can try if you're interested in trying the Myler program, which you should be, because if you're not riding in Mylers, you should try them out. They're pretty great. I also backed my girls in them. They're my go-to bit whenever I'm riding new horses. I like them a lot. So please try them. And thanks again to Judy. Thanks again to everybody
Absolutely.
who tuned in. Thanks to everybody who's patient while I had myself on mute. Thank you guys. Have a great evening. If there's anything else,
Thanks, Lenore. Thank you,
thank you.
everybody.